Okay, I'm back, and in this video I'm going to work with the tank, the fuel tank. I'm letting the fuselage and wing parts air out and acclimate to the humidity where I live. So I'll do a couple other things while I'm waiting. So got my bag that had the tank stuff in it, so I got my tank. I got a small piece of fuel tubing. Got the Dubro filling station to add my extra clunk, and the fuel filter. Okay, the fuel filter I won't need right now. Can't put that in until after the engine and tank are mounted. Well, that's going to go back in the bag. All right. So what I'm going to do is take the tank apart just to make sure they didn't sneak in an extra clunk on me, because when you read the thing about the tank in the it says 3-line fuel system. Okay, so 3-line fuel system. So you got pressure, you got fill, and you got carb. So the Hobbico NexStar Aircraft uses a 3-line fuel system to simplify fueling and defueling. Well, you can't defuel through what good's fueling it on one thing and then defueling it on another. Doesn't make sense to me, because I don't like to remove the line that has to the carburetor that has the fuel filter on it. I just assume to leave that alone, and the fuel and defueling ought to come from this green tank that has a little stopper on it. Okay, so we're going to take the tank apart by unscrewing this screw, which is sometimes kind of tight, and slowly, surely pulling it out. Okay, so there you go. One clunk, vent line, and so this is the other reason why you take the tank apart. The vent line is the white line, okay? The green line is the fill line, and the vent needs to be toward the top, okay? So if you see how these are bent, they're not bent very well, okay? So I agree the vent line needs to be to the top, okay? And if you put the vent line to the top like that, gotta hold it up to the light and look. I wish they'd use a clear plastic, but they don't. Okay, so if I put the vent line with the white tube up like it should, that vent tube is not all the way to the top. So this needs to be turned a little bit like that. Okay, so the vent line is pointing all the way to the top of the tank. I have seen and had a student put a tank in, build his airplane, put a tank in, and the vent line was like that, and he could only fill the tank halfway. Not good. We kept running. It was a new airplane. We'd run it for a while. It ran out of gas twice on us before I figured out, okay, let's take the wing off and see how much fuel's in the tank. And we saw filled it up and saw it was only half full. I said, okay, fine. That vent needs to be at the top. Okay, now if that's at the top, this one can be at the bottom. It doesn't matter where it is, but it needs a piece of fuel tubing and a clunk. So it doesn't need to be this long either. So what I'm going to do is cut this off back here, and then add this piece of tubing with the clunk that's inside this. So I'm going to cut this off, and I'll be back in just a minute. Okay, I'm back, and you can see that I have marked that with a Sharpie marker, and that's where I'm going to cut it. I'm going to leave this, and I'm going to cut this bend off. And to do that, I've got a fuel tubing cutter. Okay, so it says Superior Tools Pro Line, and it's a fuel tubing cutter. And so I'm going to unwind this and cut this, and I'll show you the result in just a minute. Okay, I'm back, and you can see I've got this straight part, which is what I want to keep. This part is, I bent that a little straighter than usual. I'll use that to turn it, and I'll slowly tighten this as I turn, and it'll cut. Be back in a minute. Okay, just to show you the technique a little bit, I'm holding on to this end, that's the bent end, and I'm turning this around. Okay, and after every revolution, I tighten this a little bit more, do another revolution, and it slowly cuts it. Be back in a minute. Okay, it took about, I guess around 10 revolutions to get that cut, and you can see that that's the normal end. That's the end that's cut, and it's crimped a little. And this is the part I'm going to throw away. That's crimped a lot. So now for this crimped end, I'm going to open it up a little with a pair of long needle nose pliers, and I'm just going to stick the needle in there and open that up a little. Okay, and just that much will both deburr and open up that tube just a little bit. Okay, so now that end and that end are about the same size of an opening, and hard to tell which one's which, although I could tell that this was the end because it's got a few scratches on it. Okay, so now I've got a nice piece of fuel tubing there, and now that is going to go back in to the stopper, and let me fit that in there. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. There's the vent line. That's the line I cut, and I'm going to add this piece of blue fuel tubing and make this the same length. Before I make it the same length, I'm going to make sure that this is touching the bottom of the tank, because if it's not, I probably won't care, because I only get down to about a half a tank before I land. Maybe I go as far as a third of a tank left before I land. But I want this tubing to go all the way to the bottom, because this is the one I'm going to use to empty the tank. So I'll measure where the clunk's going to be before I cut the end and put the clunk on. Be back in a minute. Okay, it's hard to see the clunk through this very opaque tank, but I was able to see it, and it's about 1/4 of an inch above the bottom of the tank. So I'm going to make this tube about 1/4 inch longer and then put the clunk on. Okay, to cut this tubing, I use a good sharp pair of cutters, dikes, whatever you want to call these. These are channel locked, very good and sharp. And I'll use that to cut the tubing, which gives a nice square cut, much squarer and without any bumps or anything on it than a razor blade. Okay, I opened up my Dubro fueling system, and in it is this bit of plastic. Don't lose the small rubber washer. Okay, that rubber washer goes around the second smallest one here up at the top, so it seals and locks in place. When you epoxy glue this into the side of the fuselage, and so I've cut and added the extra clunk, and I think it's the right length. Be back in a second. Okay, I'm good. Now that I have 2 clunks in here, I can put 1 clunk in, then the other. Let's get 1 clunk in there. Then we're going to get the other clunk in there. And then that gives you room to put this in like this, so that vent line is right at the top, and I can actually see it. You probably can't, but I can see it. It's at the top. And so with that vent line at the top, I'm going to hold that in place, take my screwdriver, and tighten this down. I'll be back in just a minute. Okay, I'm back, and I got my 3-line clunk, extra clunk in tank the way I want it. I can see the clunk right at the bottom. I can't see the other clunk because it's a 1/4 inch up because of the opaqueness of the tank. The other thing I forgot to say was, when I took the stopper out for the first time, it was a little loose. Okay, it was tightened up, but I would have made it tighter. So if you don't add the extra clunk, make sure you tighten this as tight as you can, because you don't want this to leak. There is pressure in the tank, and that pressure can cause fuel. Now that's nice and tight. So get this screw as tight as you can, because it's basically tightening up the stopper here, and you don't want that to be loose. While I'm doing all this, I'm going to go ahead and add this little rubber washer to the number 2 stopper, so that when you the other 3 stoppers are not really useful unless you're using larger fuel tubing. For the 40 size engine I've got, and the I think it's 3/32 tubing that I'm using. So there I've got the little rubber ring, O-ring on this, and then when you this you're going to epoxy onto the side of the airplane, and when you put those two together, it makes a nice good seal so it'll hold it. Okay, you got to put it in all the way. There you go. So that's going to hold it in, and this is going to be the stopper that replaces this stopper. Save that stopper, it's good for something. Well, I'm going to use this stopper because I want it mounted into this side of the where the engine's mounted. Okay, one final tip about the tank. As you tighten this stopper down, it does expand out a little. So don't put it down so hard that you can't get the stopper through the hole in the front of the airplane. So I'm going to put the 3 lines in this direction, although that's backwards, it's okay. And I'm going to make sure that the tank will slip into there relatively easily. Okay. Now, when you get ready to mount the tank, if you look inside the fuselage, there's 2 in there, kind of hard to see. There's support for the tank, and there's 2 sort of half circles of rubber that is the tank support. Okay. When I did the last one, that rubber actually prevented me from getting the tank in. I actually cracked the bottom support and had to CA glue it back on. So when we get around to putting this in, I'll show you a technique to make sure you don't crack the plywood in there. It turned out fine. Actually, I had to cut part of that rubber off for the tank to fit. So I'll show you that later. Thank you.